Hey everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Rock and Roll Experience with Mike Brunn. On this episode, I'm really excited to have with me keyboardist Gary Corbett. Kiss fans of course know him from the years that he toured with the band, as well as in 1989 when he toured with the Paul Stanley solo band. Gary is able to share some great stories about his friendship with the late great Eric Carr, as well as what it was like working with Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, what he thought about Bob Kulick, and so much more Kiss stories. I think you guys are going to really love this. Gary also was able to shed a little light on the upcoming Tale of the Fox 2 DVD, as well as the fact that he's working on a book. Rock fans will also enjoy hearing the stories that he shares with us about his time playing with Cinderella. Plus, he also shares a bunch of great stories working with pop artists such as Cyndi Lauper, Debbie Gibson, and Taylor Dane. So there's certainly a little bit for everybody in this episode. During the first couple of minutes of our chat, Gary was having a little bit of connectivity issues, but I think we've edited it down so where it runs still nice and smooth, and certainly after the first couple of minutes, it was really clean and smooth sailing from there, so you guys will definitely want to stick through this and enjoy the entire conversation with Gary. Thanks, Gary, for a great conversation, and I look forward to having you on again in the future. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. If you're listening to one of my podcasts, subscribe over there as well. Also, head on over to Facebook and follow my page, The Rock and Roll Experience with Mike Brunn, where each and every day we talk about all the rock and roll music that you love. Now, without further ado, let's get started with my conversation with keyboardist Gary Corbett. At what age did you start getting into music, and what kind of bands were you listening to growing up as a kid?
My parents started giving me lessons at 4,
Oh, wow.
because they thought that I seemed to at the very least really liked it.
Mm-hmm.
So we started lessons at 4, and my dad was taking lessons as a hobby, and so he already had a teacher, and so I started tagging along with his lessons. And yeah, I started at 4. I started working and playing in bands at 10.
Oh, wow. That's
old,
young.
Working on weekends and stuff.
That's young.
Yeah.
And was it always keyboards? Was keyboards always your thing?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was always piano. It was always piano lessons. But of course, the bands of the time were. Once the Beatles came out, I was hooked.
Mm-hmm.
I used to watch them on Sullivan, stay up on Sunday nights and wait for that. The last act of the night when they'd finally come on, and and then once I saw the Dave Clark 5, because they had the keyboard player,
Mm-hmm.
and he had that cool Vox organ, that was it for me. And I
Right.
knew that was going to be it. So, playing in bands as a kid, it was always organ, because I wasn't going to take a piano around.
Mm-hmm.
And so electronic organs were the thing until I was in high school with synthesizers and all that stuff started. And the keyboard started getting a little bit better, the portable stuff.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, did you grow up in Brooklyn? Did I read that right?
Yes.
Where in Brooklyn? Because I grew up in
Yeah.
Bensonhurst. So where in Brooklyn were you?
Bensonhurst.
Nice. We were neighbors.
I graduated from FDR High School, which is on 20th Avenue, 58th Street.
I lived between 16th and 17th Avenue.
Where?
Bay 13th
What street?
Street. Bay 13?
Oh, Bay 13. Oh, wow. Okay, so you were right near Umberto. Yeah, and Dyker by the golf course.
And did you live in Brooklyn your entire childhood?
Borough Park, 44th Street,
Okay.
and 16th Avenue.
Nice.
And in like 5th grade, we moved to 51st Street, and it was always more into the Bensonhurst area.
Mm-hmm.
But then we moved to 80th and 19th Avenue.
Right.
My last address was on 84th Street and 11th Avenue.
Uh-huh.
The guy that does the big Christmas decorations on 84th Street. It's with all the mechanical things. I don't know when the last time you were there,
Mm-hmm.
but there's one house that looks like Disney.
Yes,
and
I know exactly what
lived
you're talking
directly across. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was where I lived until I left New York.
Oh, that's very cool. So then you must have grown up as a kid going to Lemore's, I'm going to guess?
Yeah, oh yeah. I played there a bunch too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd flip-flop between being a strip club and a rock club, and a strip club and a rock club. And I used to play in bands in junior high school with James Lomenzo.
From White Line.
Was in White Lion.
Yeah.
Yeah. He grew up on 57th Street.
Right, yeah.
He lived on 57th and 17th Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to play the block parties there. And
Yeah.
he went to Shallow. I went to Montauk. But just by coincidence, my childhood friends that I hung out with lived on his block. And so that's how we met.
Ah, that's
But,
very...
yeah, back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's very cool. So how did you get your first break then in the music industry, coming from growing up in Brooklyn? How did you get that first break?
Well, let me think. The first real break, I guess, was writing Shebop.
Then, yep, Cyndi Lauper.
Yeah. I was playing in high school bands, and then, of course, I made the transition into Manhattan and trying to play, playing at Gildersleeves and all the local clubs and trying to get somewhere. And then I started playing with a group of guys from Staten Island, which included Tommy Price, who went on to be Billy Idol's drummer and Joan Jett's drummer.
Yep.
And that circle of guys in Staten Island, a lot of them started getting. Chasm Sultan was one of them.
Okay.
There was a lot of guys that were real guys. Sandy Gennaro, drummer, another drummer, was part of that. And so once I had my driver's license, and I started meeting musicians and just trying to pursue the dream,
Absolutely.
I always played in a wedding band on the weekends, so I could support myself during the week and not have to have any real job. And I joined a band in 1980 that was on Mercury Records called Tom Dickey and the Desires.
Okay.
Which we had 2 albums on Mercury. Didn't do much, but it did lead me to a guy named Steve Lunt, who was one of the prospective producers for our second album, and he and I struck up a relationship and started writing together. Okay. And he and Cindy. At the time, Cindy was in a band called Blue Angel, which I used to go see it in New York all the time. I loved her as a front person. And when Steve and I started writing together, it came up that he and she shared a manager. And so we were like, well, okay, can we get her to sing our demos? When we finished the song and we wanted to do a demo of it, we need somebody to sing it. So he reached out to her, and she had come over to sing a couple of other songs, and we had the track to Shebop in the can just musically. And by accident, while she was there, she heard that track, and she had just signed her first record deal with Sony as a solo artist. And she said, well, I'll write it. I'll write the lyrics and, do it on the record. So that was really the first break, because that sold a lot of records.
Oh, absolutely. I'm one of the guys, I love reading like a liner notes of albums, and I loved pop music. I loved rock, hard rock, but I loved pop. So I had the Cyndi Lauper album. And I remember when I became familiar with your name from Kiss, one day sitting in my room with this, and I was like, wait a second. I know that name on Shebop. And it's like, I was surprised, confused, but I thought that was really cool. So you're saying the music was really you and one other person?
Yeah.
That is so cool.
And it's funny you say you love pop music. It's the same for me, and I'm sure we're in a similar age bracket. When we were kids, pop music didn't really mean any one type of music. It could be the Supremes, it could be Grand Funk, it could be Jimi Hendrix, and so growing up as a aspiring musician, to me, I liked all of it. I didn't want to just play with rock bands, and that's why my career throughout the 80s and stuff, you see, I did a Kiss tour, a Paul Stanley tour, and then do a Debbie Gibson tour, and then I played with Taylor Dane, and that's why, because I like all kinds of music, and if I don't get to play all styles of music, I feel like I'm kind of missing out.
No, that's one of the things.
It's because of the way we were brought up.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the things to me that as I was reading through your bio, and I'll admit I didn't realize you also worked with Debbie Gibson and Taylor Dane, and I remember both of them from the 80s, big pop artists. So what was your role with the two of them? With
Deb, I was her musical director on the Electric Youth tour.
Oh, wow.
I played keyboard.
Okay.
Band. I was the band leader, and kind of ran the whole show for her musically. And then we continued to work together in the studio. I produced an album, one of her albums, when she turned 30. We had reconnected, and I was living in Florida at the time and owned a recording studio. and wound up doing one of her CDs, producing. So it was really cool to get to work with her again. And the same with Taylor. I started out, just being a keyboard player, and by default, because her musical director left, I kind of became the musical director for a minute, because I ended up leaving that band to go back. It was for the Kiss Hot in the Shade tour.
Okay.
They called, and it was time to go back to work. And I had done a few tours prior with them, so I knew what I was dealing with, and I ended up having to leave Taylor, which is, to this day, one of the biggest regrets of my career.
Oh, wow.
It probably is the biggest regret, because I loved her. I absolutely, that girl could sing her butt off. And she had great musicians in her band. And I was there long enough to do, we did the Arsenio Hall show.
Okay.
We did a string of TV shows, and I did the Love Will Lead You Back video, because that was the single when I was with her. So so you'll see me in that video too. I mean, she was great. It was just a purely a business thing. I didn't really like her managers very much. They were kind of jerking our chain a bit, and at the same time, I got a call to go back to a very comfortable situation, and chose to do that. But musically, I would have really loved to have done her tour.
That's cool. And there's not a lot of people, I think, that would expect the guy playing with Kiss, ultimately with Cinderella as well, right? Played with a bunch of different hard rock guys, would be into playing with Taylor Dane and say, hey, that's one of my biggest regrets that I didn't continue working with her. I think that's pretty cool, actually.
Well, and she was a rock, big rock fan. If you got in the car with her, she would get in and crank up the AC/DC and sing and belt it out at the top of her lungs. And boy, she could belt it too.
That is cool.
Yeah, she was very cool.
That's cool. So now you mentioned before the Kiss connection, right? And we'll talk about that a bit. But before you started playing with Kiss, did I read right that you once auditioned for Blackjack, which we know was Michael Bolton and Bruce Kulick, right?
And Sandy Gennaro on drums.
That's right. Yeah. So what was that? You auditioned. Obviously, I guess you didn't get the gig, but do you remember that audition?
Yeah, very, very well, actually. I mean, it was a big deal to me. I had known of Bruce because of he had done the first Meatloaf tour.
Sure.
Him and Bob both were the guitar players on the Meatloaf tour. I did a short stint with Ian Hunter, and again, it was like the same camp of musicians, and so I knew of Bruce long before I met him. And so when the Blackjack thing came up, I was still, I was only 18 or 19 at the time, and so I wasn't developed and far along, and I didn't get the gig. But the first night I arrived in LA and met the guys in Kiss for the first time, when I was introduced to Bruce, he looked at me and he said, "You look familiar." And I told him that I had, he goes, "Oh my God, you were that young kid." He goes, "It was between you and one other guy, and we really liked you, but you were too young." And so he remembered my audition. Right. So that was at least flattering.
Right. No, look, right. That's pretty cool. So at what point then did you get connected with Kiss, and how did you get connected with Kiss?
Okay, so I took my first royalty check for Shebop and bought an Apple computer. Remember when Apple first came out with their home computer, the Apple IIe? It was pretty much like the first home mass market computer, and MIDI was just starting. Okay, yeah. And so I took my first royalty check and bought an Apple computer because MIDI was supposed to be the next big thing, and I was all about it. I loved the technology at the time, and so I bought all this gear, and because of the gear, I started doing a lot of programming. Because in the 80s, if you remember, it was all that programmed dancey pop stuff like Madonna.
Yep, absolutely.
And it was all done with computers, and that's why it sounded so stiff at the time. But that was the flavor of the day, and I was all about it. And so I was doing a lot of session work around New York, and I was working at Electric Lady. And when you work like that with the computers, you're also the only musician because I'm playing the drum parts with the keys and I'm programming the bass line. And I really missed the chemistry of playing with a band.
Okay.
And I met a guy by the name of Phil Ashley, who played keyboards on the Crazy Nights records.
Yep.
We had struck up a conversation. We met at the coffee machine at Electric Lady Studios. He was working in one room, and I was working downstairs in the back, and in the back room. And just in a casual conversation, it came up that, I was really tired of being locked in the studio, and I really wanted to go out and do a tour. And about a week after the conversation, we both parted ways, went back to our rooms, and I got a phone call from Phil saying, "Hey, listen, are you still interested in going on the road?" And I said, "Yeah, we're very interested." He goes, "I got myself in a bit of a jam, and I would really love for you to be able to help me out. I got myself booked on 2 different tours, and obviously I can only do one. I'd love for you to do the other." I said, "Look, so who are you playing with?" And he said, "Lou Gramm." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's one of my all-time favorites." So he goes, "You're going to play with Lou Gramm. I'm going to play with Mick Jagger." So I was a couple of days after that, he called me again. He said, "Listen, I did the keyboards on the Kiss record, and they want to take a keyboard player and tour with them. And, it's not going to be him because he's going to be doing Mick Jagger. And, would I be interested?" And he explained, there was off stage, which, I totally understood with those guys. And I went and had a meeting with Paul and the band manager at the time was Chris Hunt.
Okay. Yeah.
And we sat and talked for a while. And they basically said, they basically trusted Phil's judgment. So once our conversation was done, they hired me. And that was how the gig happened. It was just Phil Ashley's recommendation.
So obviously it sounds like it was Paul that you met first, and no surprise, we know in the 80s he was into some of that pop stuff. The keyboards was all him, right? What was it like when you met Gene Simmons? I have to envision he was like, "Get this keyboardist away from me" at first.
Yeah, there was a little bit of that. But no, actually, I was doing a tour with Lou. I was still playing with Lou Gramm. We were over in Europe finishing our tour, and they were starting rehearsals for the Crazy Nights tour. So they were already a week into rehearsals when I flew back from Europe. And at the time, the reason I met with Paul was because he was the only one that was still in New York. Okay. The rest of the band had been out in L.A. So he dealt with that, but the band was going to rehearse for the tour in L.A. And so when I came back from Europe, I flew straight from Germany right past New York, straight to L.A., and I got picked up at the airport and driven straight to a taping that they were doing for Top of the Pops. And I had purchased a leather jacket while we were in Germany, and I was wearing it, and Gene really liked my jacket. So that broke the ice really well because he said he wanted my jacket. Okay. But he was definitely not a fan of the keyboard. And he used to ice skate around the stage. He'd put his hands behind his back and slide his feet along the stage. Every time the sound man asked me, "Could you give me a little keyboards?" And I'd start to play for the sound guy. I'd be coming through the PA, and Gene would start ice skating because that's what keyboards
meant to him, right?
Gene. Yeah. So, but it was all in good humor. I knew he didn't really like the keyboards, but he definitely couldn't deny that they were there on the record. Right. And they weren't going to play the tracks, and plus, I played on every song whether there were keyboards on it or not. And part of what I was doing in those songs was helping him to be more free to run around and do his show. So, he got used to it. It took a while, but and we definitely butted heads a couple of times about a few things early on. But for the most part, my time there was always a lot of fun, a lot of laughs. Those guys, have that New York sense of humor, and
sure,
of course, so do I, and so it was always a lot of fun.
Right. So, like you said, you were playing, because I always found this fascinating in the 80s, is that they did actually add keyboards to some of the classic songs they were doing, whether it was Love Gun or, some of the Rock and Roll All Night. So did you enjoy adding that element to those classic songs? And
sure.
Yeah. Were you a fan beforehand?
I was not a Kiss fan before. I came out, I was already that age of like Carr and like super complicated music, and the more complicated, that macho 16, 17-year-old
Sure.
mentality.
Mm-hmm.
So when they came out, I didn't really care about them, and some of my friends did, some of my friends didn't. There was no denying how huge they are and what legends that they were. I didn't own one Kiss record, and when I was hired, when I asked Paul for a set list, he said that they didn't know what songs they were going to be doing in the show, and so I should just get familiar with everything. And so I left that meeting with 2 stacks of out, because I think Crazy Nights was like their 21st album or something, and I had none of them. So I literally left the office with the entire collection under my arm, which I then had to transfer to cassette so that I could listen to it on an endless loop while I was traveling through Germany with Lou. And and that was how I got familiar with all the material. So, when I got to LA and in rehearsals, it was wide open as to what I was supposed to be doing. None of them could tell me what I was supposed to be doing.
Sure.
They don't know keyboard stuff, and so they kind of just left it to me. And so, of course, I learned the songs that had keyboards. I learned the parts that were there. But on everything else, it just became about filling the holes for me.
Sure.
And that became the challenge, both with the sounds that I used, because I didn't play anything complicated. I was basically doubling what Paul played on guitar a lot, to help make what he played stronger, and doubling what Gene was playing on bass to help the bottom end of everything be solid. They would be running around doing the show, and their playing wasn't always the most precise.
Right.
And so that's what I was there. I was like an expensive piece of outboard gear to help them, polish everything, like auto-tune now.
Right. Now, during those rehearsals, I always found this fascinating as a Kiss fan. The Crazy Nights album, one of the singles and videos was the song Turn on the Night. Do you remember, did you guys ever rehearse that? Was there a reason you guys didn't? Yeah, so you did. Oh, that's fascinating. So why didn't you do it live?
I did. I think it was a really hard song. I think the vocals must have been really high or something.
They were,
It was one of those. And it was just the kind of thing that, standing there looking at an 8-month tour, having to do it 5 nights in a row every week, it just was not going to happen.
But you guys actually did rehearse it a few times.
Yes, we did. We learned it and rehearsed it for the Crazy Nights tour.
Oh, wow.
And it never made the cut. I don't think we ever played it live.
No, I don't think so either. So Bruce, most recently, I think he was on Facebook or one of the social media sites, and he acknowledged that when they did Reason to Live, he said he really wasn't playing the keyboards. He credited you. He said it was Gary. Behind the curtain, his keyboard, he said, was more of a prop. Is that true?
Oh, he played. There were 2 parts keyboard-wise on the record, and just for the sake of, and I guess because the keyboards were so predominant in that song, the band felt that it would be like too weird to hear the keyboards that predominantly, but not see anybody playing them.
Okay.
And so, at least for the intro of the song, which was largely keyboards, and so Bruce played the first part of the song. He played the intro, and I think it was through the first verse until the band kicked in full band. Okay. At which point he would swing his guitar around, and the keyboard tech, the roadies would come out and wheel the keyboard that he was playing off the stage, and I picked up the slack from where I was. But he actually played.
Okay.
He did play the beginning of it.
All right, that's cool.
I give him credit.
Absolutely. No, that's cool. I remember, because I was always a big collector of all the bootlegs in the 80s. And like you said before, you knew that you were kind of the guy off stage, and it sounds like you were okay with that. But I remember in 88, there was the Monsters of Rock tour, and there was one of the shows was filmed. And all of a sudden,
I know where this is going.
Wait a second. There's a keyboardist with Kiss. Did the band know that you made the cut on TV? Was there any talk about that?
Well, not till afterwards.
Okay.
Not till afterwards. It wasn't planned. That camera shot was really the shot that was used to feed the 2 screens, the 2 giant screens on both sides of the stage, for the people. Because that was a festival, and it was probably, I think there was 70,000 people there, and so they have the big screens up. I don't think it was ever really supposed to go any further than that. But even that, to have me, up on the screen, I don't think that was the type of thing that would really piss Gene off.
Okay.
And nobody knew what happened until afterwards, and people started coming up, and then it became a bootleg thing. Because obviously, of course, there was a VCR running somewhere.
Of course.
Yeah, and I found out about it like a year or two later because of the bootleg thing, pretty funny.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I remember the guy coming around, and because I was on the side of the stage, and I knew he wasn't supposed to be filming me, but he came around, he was down on his knees, and he was filming up, and what am I supposed to do?
What are you going to do?
Him away?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You can't do anything about
that. I
that.
was a little busy. Yeah. So, I kind of got a good chuckle out of it, believe me.
Absolutely. And look, as a Kiss fan, I think it's kind of cool because it's almost like a peek behind the curtain, so to speak. So I thought it was a cool moment. So now,
well, everybody knew I was there.
Exactly.
The Kiss fans are a loyal bunch of people. They do their homework. They do the investigating anyway. Up until the Hot in the Shade tour, I was always just out on the floor or behind a PA stack or something. Out in the Shade tour, they actually built a little enclosure for me to hide me.
Okay.
But at that point, they weren't hiding. People who had side seats usually could see me because I was right behind the PA.
Right.
Near the monitor guy or something.
Right. Interesting.
Or on the other side. So, it wasn't a complete secret. It'd be silly for them to think, that nobody knew.
Right.
Besides the fact that you could hear it.
Right. Very true. Very, very true. Now, there was a period of the Crazy Nights tour, actually, where, I'll say sadly, they let you go for budgetary reasons, right? And then how many shows was it altogether that you missed, do you know?
I probably missed more than I did, actually.
Really? Okay.
The tour started, I did the first 3 weeks, and I think the break when we took the break, it was for Christmas. It was like middle of December when we broke, and the plan was that we would leave the day after Christmas, and the day before Christmas Eve, so that would be the 23rd, like 3 days or 2 days before I was supposed to be leaving again, is when I found out that I wasn't going. That was a really sucky day.
Sure.
Stopped at Electric Lady. Got a phone call while I was there. Took it in the lounge, and it was Paul, who was very apologetic, and I didn't know what he was talking about. He goes, "Oh, you didn't talk to Gene yet?" And I said, "No." Oh man, well, and that's how I found out. So it was really like a kick in the nuts when it happened.
I'm sure. Yeah.
And so then they left the day after Christmas, and then after the day after they did their first show, I got a call saying, "We got to figure out how to get you back out here." It took a couple of weeks until I did, and then I came out for another 3 weeks, and I think that was it. When I went home, I was supposed to come back more, but it never happened. And then I don't think they called me again until almost springtime when they were getting ready for the Masters of Rock tour.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So now, did you do the Rich shows with them?
Yes.
Okay, so that must have been, I was at one of those. That as a New Yorker, Brooklyn guy, that must have been a blast for you.
Absolutely. And as was the Paul Stanley solo show, which was also a lot of fun.
Right. Now,
this was a great club.
It was. What do you remember about those shows, the Kiss ones, if anything? The Ritz ones?
I remember it was really hot.
Yes.
I remember I was stuffed off in the wing because space was really limited. And we were leaving for Europe the next morning, if I remember correctly. Yep. And it was a Friday and Saturday night, and I think we flew to Europe on Sunday, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
And I remember going shopping on that Saturday afternoon and buying an 8mm video camera, which I took to for the Monsters tour and all over Europe.
Oh, nice.
I wanted to have some video, and so I have a lot of really cool video with Eric because he was my hanging buddy on the road, and so we would go out in the streets and harass people, and I was filming, and he'd be the harasser. Yeah, yeah, a lot of fun.
That's very. Now, do you still have those videos? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Very
yeah.
cool.
Oh yeah. I
Very cool.
found, there's one. There was three or four. There was three tapes from that Europe trip,
Mm-hmm.
and I've only yet found two of those three.
Mm.
But I recently, about a year ago, had them transferred
Nice.
to digital
Digital. Mm-hmm.
because, Eric's sister is doing a Tale of the Fox 2.
Mm-hmm.
And because I had so much stuff of him,
Awesome.
a lot of it is going to be coming from me. I don't know how much of what I gave her about an hour's worth of Eric stuff.
Nice. Nice.
So,
Yeah.
she has a lot to choose from,
Mm-hmm.
including, I would take out my camera even while we were on stage.
Oh, wow.
And,
Okay.
and film his drum solos or,
Mm-hmm.
walk around the back and, he's throwing sticks at me. And,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of cool stuff that brings back lots of memories when I see it.
That's awesome. No, and I love seeing that type of stuff. So to me, that gets me excited to hear about some of that Tale of the Fox 2 stuff. So certainly I'll be looking
it's
for
coming.
that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely coming. Of course, with this whole pandemic thing, I don't know how that's changed her plans, if at all,
Sure.
as far as when she's planning on releasing it. But she's got the footage from me about 6 months ago, I guess. Or,
Awesome.
No, more than that. Probably a few months before this whole thing started. So
Okay.
she should be pretty far along in the project, I would bet.
That's awesome. Awesome. So now, before you mentioned the Paul Stanley tour, right? So, the Crazy Nights tour winds down. Paul decides that he wants to go out and do a solo tour, and you're a part of that. So now this time you're on the stage, and I remember thinking, well, I know Bob Kulick, I knew who Eric Singer was, and oh yeah, there's the guy that was playing keyboards with Kiss, the guy that was in that bootleg tape. Now I have seen him on the stage. So how was that experience different for you touring with Paul compared to with Kiss?
Well, that was a lot of fun, that tour. Paul was, it was his whole reason for doing it was to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
And to play some of the songs from his solo record that he never got to play.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really the only reason. And when it started, it was really supposed to be 4 shows. That was all that was initially going to be booked.
Okay.
And but it was such a success once the ticket sales started that they added all the others. And it would have continued. We started towards the end. We started getting offers to go to Japan and go to Europe, and Gene put a stop to all of that because it was time for the Kiss thing to start up again.
Okay.
And it's okay to go have fun and do your hobby while you're when we're off, but now it's time to get back to work. It was kind of the attitude.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, most people think Gene was so absent in the 80s, but you're saying in this case, he kind of wanted Paul back in the band. Now, all right, let's get back to Kiss.
Well, and it was time, I guess, but there's also a bit of jealousy.
Sure.
Those two guys have a very interesting relationship. It's they know how to push each other's buttons, and they know how to get under each other's skin, and they know how to get what they want from each other.
Sure.
And Gene, although Gene didn't really, at that time, I think Paul was writing a lot more of the material, and Paul was really the driving force at that point. When it came to the business, Gene was always the guy, and
Absolutely.
so, it came down to that, and you don't mess with the business.
Right. Understandable. Now, and what do you remember about working with Bob Kulick? Obviously, he sadly recently passed away, but what do you remember working with Bob?
He's great. Great guitar player. Really great guitar player. And probably, how do I say this without insulting Bruce? Bruce is a great guitar player as well. But for the band Kiss, Bob was probably the most right replacement for Ace that they would have ever had. His playing was exactly what the band needed. So it was that was a tough thing for Bob to swallow. So it was great to do the solo tour with him and for him to get a chance to show that.
Right.
And it bothered. I think it bothered Bob. That he wasn't the guy that replaced Ace. To be honest, and I don't think it's any secret that it bothered him. you know. So you know, it was a fun tour and a great band, and of course Eric Singer, you know, who now is the guy in the makeup.
Yeah.
You know, he's also a phenomenal musician.
Mm-hmm.
We hit it off personally and musically, and the Badlands thing was just getting started. The record was just wrapping up, and I remember when I heard the record, Eric's playing on that record. I mean, it was like John Bonham, you know, and it's just phenomenal. And live, one of the most exciting drummers I've ever played with. And to be honest with you, at the Paul solo show at the Ritz, Eric was standing with my wife on the balcony watching the show, and leaned over and said to her, "That guy's going to have my gig." And when that was the first thing he said to me when we walked off the stage, and I looked at him like, "Are you kidding me? What are you even talking about?" You know. But you know, Eric was a bit insecure, and he always needed that reassurance that, you know, which is odd when you think about it, because here he is, you know, the drummer in Kiss. You think, you know, he's not going to be an insecure guy,
right?
But you know, he was a very. I loved the guy. I just loved him. He was a great guy.
Well, like you said, you and him, it sounds like you were close on tour and whatever. But I know that from all the stories we've heard, Eric Carr was unhappy that he wasn't asked to be the drummer in Paul Stanley's solo shows. And Paul would say to him, "But you're the drummer in Kiss. You're not my backup drummer here." But did he ever talk to you about how much that bothered him that he wasn't on that tour?
Yes.
Okay.
But I think he finally got it, because you know, and to be honest, I felt bad, because the thing that made it confusing for him was me, because you know, it's easy to say, well, you know, if I used any of the band members, then it wouldn't be my solo tour; it would be half a Kiss, and you know, and that was kind of the answer. But you know, the fact that I was there kind of made it. But it was like, well, that doesn't count, because I'm not even a visual member of the band when we're playing. So, you know, you can't. But that was his reasoning, and you know, he got it though. He knew that he couldn't be the drummer on the solo tour, but like I said, he was insecure, and anything that opened the door for Paul to play with another drummer was a threat to Eric's job.
Sure.
In his mind.
In his mind, right.
Right. You know, that was just his nature. He was just a very insecure guy when it came to that. You know, and it wasn't 100% without reason. His dealings with those two guys was always a little bit odd and strange, and they had a very weird relationship, I'll say. You know, but.
Now, I've heard the stories that on the Hot in the Shade tour, and I was even talking to Carrie Stevens recently, and she confirmed, you know, hey, that Eric for big periods of time didn't talk to really anybody in the band during the Hot in the Shade tour. So it seems like coming off of that Stanley solo tour, he really struggled with his position in the band for a bit of time, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and he and Paul had a very contentious relationship. I think that Paul was, you know, when Paul would get mad at him for his behavior, he would do more stuff to mess with him, and again, he knew how to push his buttons and how to, you know, how to get the maximum result, and he played those cards, whether it was taking the drum solo out of the show, or you know, and so for the first few months of that tour, Eric would show up at the bus with his big headphones on. And his big Porsche Carrera sunglasses, and he'd walk past everybody as though we were invisible, and then he'd just sit there with his back to everybody in the front lounge of the bus, and it was uncomfortable, and I know that's what he was going for.
Right, mission accomplished.
But,
right.
Yeah. Well, it got to a point where, you know, it was definitely going to start affecting their relationship on a deeper level, because it was, you know, and then it kind of, I guess they must have had a talk, and it subsided a bit. But cool. He always felt that from those guys, you know?
So you mentioned his drum solo before, and he was always known for having all those pads around him and all the electronics in it. And he started doing that, I think, before you went to the picture. But how much did you help him once you joined, kind of coordinating all of that?
Well, Phil actually had helped him hook up the pads initially, and it was initially set up to trigger one synth module so that he could hit the pad that would correspond with the last chord of the song when the band was bashing out that last note. He'd be able to play along with them. When I got there, we added the sampler to his rack. And that's when he started doing all those weird like Metallica samples in his drum solo. And I had whenever he did stuff like that, I was the one that technically made it happen for him.
Okay, nice. Now, obviously, you toured with them on Crazy Nights. You toured with Paul in '89. You toured with them in 1990. And in between that time period, they recorded a few, X and Sex, You Make Me Rock Hard for Smashes Thrashes. And then they recorded Hot in the Shade. And I'm always surprised that you weren't the keyboardist they used on the album. So why not? Were you out doing some of the other tours that you were talking about earlier?
I probably was away, but it would be bad etiquette to not go back to Phil Ashley.
Okay.
Because he's the one that recommended me.
Okay.
And to be honest with you, we had a little bit of a strained relationship with Phil, because when Lou Gramm did his second solo record, he called me to play and not Phil, and that kind of, I think, hurt our relationship with mine and Phil's relationship a little bit, because he didn't take kindly to that. But it's music, and you really can't argue with chemistry is really important. And here I was, the guy that was playing with the band now. The fact that Lou wanted me on the record shouldn't have offended the guy who left the band a year and a half ago. But it did. But Paul and Phil were very close friends, and that wasn't, and I wouldn't even care, because Phil also Phil had a studio at within Electric Lady. He rented a room, and he had his little portable studio set up there where he would do demos for people and stuff.
Okay.
And he actually did the demos with Paul for all the Crazy Night stuff. So he was more involved in the creative process than just playing keyboards on the record, because he was the guy that was working with Paul in New York when everybody else was out in L.A.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah. So Paul, so that's Phil, and he was great. Phil was great. There's no two ways about it.
Right.
So.
And if I'm trying to piece my timeline off the top of my head, right, and if I remember right, Debbie Gibson, Taylor Dane, that was probably like 88, 89, 87, like in between all this. So is that when you got involved with the Debbie Gibson and Taylor Dane, like Crazy Nights, and Paul wound up and you got involved there?
Well, no. Okay, so timeline-wise, I was actually called to do Debbie Gibson while I was on Paul's solo tour.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And, so it was right after Paul's solo tour that I went out and met with Deborah and her mom in Long Island, and was hired on to do that. And that was the better part of 90, I guess.
Okay.
And then I came back and got the gig with Taylor, but then Hot in the Shade happened, and then it was during Hot in the Shade is when I got introduced to the guys in Cinderella, because they were just in the middle of working on Heartbreak Station, and again they shared a manager. Larry Mazer was managing Kiss and managing Cinderella, and so he came to me, and he knew that I was more into playing like Hammond organ and bluesy rock and roll stuff than the type of stuff I was playing with the guys. And so he came to me and he said, "Hey, listen, Cinderella is in the studio. They're doing a new record. There's a lot more keyboards on this one than the first two, and they have to get a keyboard player. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Absolutely." And they had a keyboard player off stage. but the guy basically just played like string pads, and
Okay.
he was kind of doing like what I was doing with Kiss,
Okay.
but he was really a guitar player who could play a little bit of keyboards.
Gotcha. Okay.
And now they were getting into using real keyboards on the record with B3 and piano and all that stuff. So they needed to get somebody. And so when Kiss played in Philadelphia, we had a night off, probably the night before or 2 nights before, and I was invited over to Tom's house for dinner. We had dinner. We sat and chatted. After dinner, we sat down at his piano in his living room, and he pulled out his guitar, and we jammed for half hour or so. And I went back to my hotel and left the next day with Kiss. And about a week later, they called me and said, "Hey, would you be interested to do the Heartbreak Station tour?" So that was during Hot in the Shade.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then now you've played with Cinderella, I'll say, a number of times over the years, right? It wasn't just that one time in like 91, right? You've been on and off with them.
Right.
When was the last time you played with them? Was it?
2011.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. And you're in one of their DVDs. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, well, there's a live from Heartbreak, during the Heartbreak Station tour.
Right. That's one. Yep.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay.
But, yeah, that was a great tour. That was such a great, we had the background singers and the sax player, and it was a big production. And the real shame of it is that huge production that we had, I think it got reduced down from like 10 trucks to 3 trucks after the third show. We lost all the moving stage parts, but yeah, it was an amazing production. I again, my video camera came in handy because I filmed one of our production rehearsals, the night before the first show, where we did a full run through of the show. And my wife sat up at the sound console with the camera on a tripod and filmed, and everything worked flawlessly. So I do have the one show of
that's awesome.
Of that.
That's
great
awesome.
Pyro and the Cinderella sign was at the back of the stage. Was the whole back of it would be in flames. I mean, they had a huge stage, and yeah, that cut out after the first few shows, and then we teamed up with David Lee Roth and couldn't take, they had to do the co-headline, and so they got restricted with all that stuff.
I think that was, if I remember right, it was David Lee Roth, Cinderella, and Extreme that summer. Am I right in saying that?
Yep, and sometimes Nelson.
Oh, okay. Right.
Because again, Larry Mazer was managing them, and so they became our opening act too at times.
Right.
But I don't know, were they a fourth act on that, or was it them or Extreme? I don't remember.
You know what? I think the show, because I saw the show at Jones Beach here in New York, and I think it was Extreme, Cinderella, and David Lee Roth. I don't remember a fourth band, but we're talking almost 30 years ago. I could be wrong.
Well, no, I don't. It's not clicking with me either that there were 4. I would think that it was probably either or.
Right.
That was a pretty long tour, so it wouldn't be unusual for them to swap out the third band.
Right.
But
now it's interesting because we all know David Lee Roth's a character, right? And I love David Lee. I love his singing. I love his stuff with Van Halen, right? But everybody says he's a character. So you actually, with Kiss on the Monsters of Rock tour, David Lee Roth and Kiss, sometimes we'll even like flip-flop and who was second, who was right. I can only imagine the drama that was probably behind the scenes on that one.
Yeah, all the time.
All the time. So what was, now you're on tour with Dave a couple of years later. Did you have any relationship with him at all?
No, he's a character.
He's a character.
And he would pick one person every night, and a lot of the times it was Tom. And after the show would be over, they carried a very elaborate after party set up with them. Bar, huge like club type PA, and they would always set up a room somewhere in the arena, and the roadie guys would all give out these passes to the girls in the audience for the after party, and that was still alive and well. But the only ones that ever went to the party were actually the road crew guys. They've never left the dressing room,
right?
And he would basically hole up in the dressing room with Tom or just one other person, and it was never me. But I spent a lot of nights sitting on the bus waiting to leave because we couldn't leave without Tom, and they wouldn't let him go yet. And so he'd just sit there and do the Dave show. Basically, that's what we used to call it. And, Yeah, I never had the pleasure. He was a character.
He was a character. Now, I know Tom is still doing a lot of solo stuff, and I saw him a couple of years ago. He put on a great show. Do you know, is there any chance of there being a Cinderella reunion? Do you hear anything? Obviously, you were connected with the band for years.
I still speak to Fred pretty
Yeah.
regularly. He and I are very. I don't know what it is about drummers. I'm
As you said that, that's what went through my mind.
Yeah, yeah. He and I are very close because he's doing a lot of TV and film work now. That's what Fred has been doing, and to be honest with you, I think he's doing so well in that area that I don't think he's in any big hurry to go back to the band.
Okay.
And it's a real shame to me because of all the bands from that era, to have all of the original guys alive and healthy and looking good and able to play and to not is almost sacrilegious to me.
Yeah, they were great bands.
Yeah,
they were really great.
My favorite band to play with musically, as far as that feeling of being in a band, like when you're in high school, and feeling like proud of the band you're in. It was always those guys could play. They're the real deal, and I always enjoyed working with them. But yeah, they're too good to not be playing.
I agree. And I've heard, I don't know if this is true, that Jeff is actually now a cook or a chef, I should say, not a cook, a chef in a restaurant over in Nashville somewhere. So, hopefully one day before. Look, if they're happy, that's all that matters, right? But I'm hoping as a fan that one day before it's too late, they could get back together again.
Hey, we could always get Sebastian, his son.
Okay, there you go.
Have you seen his band?
I have not. No, I've heard about it, but I haven't seen.
Oh my gosh!
Really?
Talk about look like a mini me type vibe. He's got all of Jeff's guitars, which but he's the same height, same build, looks just like him, and his posture when he's playing the guitar and the way he holds it and the way he looks when he's playing it and the way he plays is 100% Jeff.
I'll have to check it out.
And it was so cool when I saw it because the last time I had seen Sebastian, he was maybe 14 or 15, and he used to come out on the bus with us when we would tour during the summers. He was in military school, so the summers were like time to let loose.
Sure.
And it was his chance to hang with his dad because his parents were separated, and so he lived with his mom. And so that was his summer vacation, was being on the road with us.
Right.
And at the time, he was playing the drums. And so he would regularly jam with us during sound check. And then as he got a little older, he switched to guitar, and he would jam with us at sound check. So to see him grow up like that, and then to see him like in full rock star mode now, it's almost like I feel like a proud uncle.
Now, you said you have a video camera. Do you have any video of him jamming with Cinderella?
No, because I stopped. That camera was a new toy on the Monsters of Rock tour in '88, but it got old.
Okay.
It got old carrying it around, and the thought to pull it out was not there as much.
Sure.
And,
makes sense.
And so I don't have much of Cinderella on that camera.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we didn't have the cell phones like we do now.
Right.
You could just pick it up and record.
Absolutely.
But I'm really glad I did have that camera, though, because I definitely, that trip to Europe was special. The Masters trip. And,
absolutely.
I'm glad.
Yeah. So before
like I said,
go ahead. No, please go ahead.
I was going to say, I did, like I was telling you before, I still haven't found one particular videotape. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, but when we were in Paris on that trip, there was a fan who made a replica of Eric's drum kit.
Yes.
Have you ever seen photos of that?
Yes, incredible.
Where we were staying in this hotel in Paris, and as happened very frequently, Eric and I were on our way out to lunch. We came out of the elevator in the lobby, and there was about 10 young guys standing, waiting for Eric in the lobby. And one of them was the guy with the drum kit. And so we were on our way out to lunch, but of course Eric was going to stop and talk to every fan. Because
that's who Eric was.
Right, exactly. And so I pulled out my video camera, and I videotaped this kid sitting in the lobby of this hotel putting together the drum kit, because he just had a box, and it was all in the box, and he pulled, and you remember his 3 drum kick drums and
Yeah.
like 20 toms and
Mhm.
all the pads, and plus the kid had done mini replicas of every guitar that was
Oh, wow.
used by all three guys.
Okay.
Gene's axe bass.
Okay.
And he had those all laid out on the table
Wow.
as well. And so I videotaped all of that.
Ooh.
And a few years back, I got an email from the guy saying, he said, I remember that somebody had a video camera that day, and I've reached out to everybody, and you're the last person. Please tell me it was you. And I said, yeah, actually it was, but unfortunately, that's the one tape I haven't found yet. And so I've been ripping my closets apart in my studio for the last couple of days, not because of that tape, but I'm hoping that I find it, because I think I will, once I get to the bottom of everything.
Absolutely. Now, I know you said you gave some of the footage to Loretta, and I'm excited about that. Is it something you would ever consider maybe releasing your own, like Gary's Life, 1988 to 1991 or something?
Well, I'm actually writing a book.
Oh, excellent.
As far as the videotape, I don't think I'd ever have the rights. Well, I could technically do it with my Eric footage, but I couldn't do it with any of the stuff that had the band in it, or the Kiss logo, or music playing. Yeah, I actually have toyed with it more so recently than because I was allowed to film a lot of the stuff because I was trusted, and so throughout the years I've never let any of that stuff go because I value that people trusted me,
of course.
And I want the next time that I tour with somebody for them to trust me again. So,
of course, totally makes sense.
That's kind but at this point in time, I think that, as long as it's, like I said, nothing that infringes on any copyright stuff, there's probably a good DVD in there that, that would be worth looking at. But I guess I got to finish my book first, and then we'll tackle the video project.
So talk about that. So when are you hoping to have this book complete? Because I'm excited to hear this.
As soon as possible. I've been working on it. I need to work on it more. It's tough. I thought I'd be able to just say, all right, you're going to do this an hour or 2 hours a day and do it. But I don't always feel like doing it.
Sure.
And it's hard to pick myself back, get myself back in that chair sometimes. But I'm motivated again to do it. And I really want to get it done. It's not a Kiss book. It's there is a part of it that's Kiss related, of course. No dirt. I don't talk any dirt about anybody. But I'm excited about it because it's fun for me to relive and rethink about all these things that I haven't thought about in years.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I still have a really good memory. And
that's good.
So better get it out now.
Absolutely.
Before memories start fading.
And I'll tell you this, look, I'm a Kiss fan, but I'm a music fan, and hearing the stories you were sharing about Cinderella and even the pop stuff, the Cyndi Lauper, the Debbie Gibbs, to me it sounds like a great book. So I'm excited to hopefully it'll come sooner rather than later.
All right, well, you just inspired me to work on it again.
Awesome.
And so, I promise that I did put in some time this morning, which is like the first time, and I've been talking about it more than I've been doing it, and I finally said this morning, you got to start working on it.
Right.
I'm back in the flow slowly, but I'm not going to stop until I'm done.
Awesome. Yeah, just a couple of other questions. So you mentioned before that Eric Carr drum thing, which I remember, but it makes me think back to, you were on the Hot in the Shade tour, and I spoke to Carrie Stevens about a month ago or two, and she thinks that during that tour, Eric was sick and not letting on to people that he was sick. Did you know at all that he wasn't doing well during that tour?
Yeah, everybody kind of knew. It's just that nobody knew what was happening. But, we used to leave the stage, and jump right in a van and get out before the house lights even came on. I'm sure you remember the way they do that. And so, that van ride between the venue and wherever, and the hotel, which is usually within 3-4 minutes of driving. But, everybody's toweling off and sweating and out of breath and everything. And during that tour, Eric would complain to me that his leg was numb. That was it. That's the only thing that would bother him after the show. And it's you just played drums for 2.5 hours. Not that surprising that your leg would be numb, but it was night after night after night at that point. And he didn't think enough to go to the doctor during the tour, but then he did once that tour was done. And that was a very strange, very, very, very strange illness. Just the whole timeline of it, and because the whole thing started with what they said was an infection in the sac of his heart. And then when they cleared up the infection, they discovered that there was actually a tumor on his heart that they weren't seeing because the infection made the liquid in the sac real cloudy. And then they did open heart surgery and removed the tumor, and he was supposedly okay. That he went through chemo and all that stuff. And then the whole thing with the brain hemorrhage, it just was very odd, very odd to me. And I don't know how that was related to his leg being numb, but it was horrible. It was horrible to watch, to see a close friend like that.
Absolutely. And then you actually did go back out on tour with Kiss for a brief period of time in '92 with Eric Singer, who you had played with Paul previously, right? Right. In between, you did the Cinderella thing for a little bit. Then you're back out on the road, I guess, for about 6 weeks with Kiss in the European tours, right? So how was that for you, losing a friend, obviously? It must have felt weird, I would say.
Yeah, there was a lot of tension between us. Eric and I were best friends. He had his quirks personality-wise, but I was his friend. And I was the person that he would call in the middle of the night when he was concerned about stuff that was going on. He was, whether it was well-founded or not, or it was just him being paranoid. He had a lot of issues between them. And after he passed, I held on to some of that for him, and it definitely affected the relationship and the way I felt about being around those guys. I wouldn't do what Eric did and put on headphones and blinders and just walk past them, but I'm sure they could see a difference. We knew each other for a long time at that point,
right? Sure.
Maybe 5 or 6 years, and so Europe was not fun for me. And I love Eric Singer, like I said before. I mean, we had gotten close, and there wasn't a better drummer to take Eric's place than Eric Singer. And so that had nothing to do with it. It just, I was still hurting over the personal side of how everything went down between the band and Eric. And
So was it your decision to walk away at that point then, after that?
It was mutual. I think I felt it, and they kind of were feeling it too. I pushed the ball to make it happen when I did after we got back before the U.S. tour started. In retrospect, I kind of wish I could have held on a little bit longer, because then I would have been the only person that ever do the job. And historically, not that it has a significance. I love Derek Sherinian. He's a great guy, great musician. But to be able to somebody brought that up to me, and it never entered my mind until they said it to me. But now it's now it sticks in my craw a little bit. But I couldn't. The thrill was gone, as B.B. King used to say.
Absolutely. But now, fast forwarding all the way to today, I saw you're actually doing a show. I think it's tomorrow night, right? With Derek. With Derek St. Holmes, right? So, talk about that. What's going on there?
Well, I've been doing a thing. Nashville has kind of become the witness protection program for '80s hair band guys. It's like everybody secretly relocated here. And so about 10 or 15 years ago, we started doing this thing called scrap metal, which was originally founded with Mark Slaughter, Gunnar Nelson, Kelly Keagy from Night Ranger, myself, and a guitar player named Dave Marshall.
Okay.
And what we did was we played there's a thing called Tin Pan South that happens here in town. It's a publishers convention for a week, and during that week there's live music events, songwriter nights at all the clubs around town. A lot of country stuff. But one of the publishers said, hey, why don't you guys put together a band, and with all the hits that you guys have between you, you could put together a set of great pop hits.
That's what I'm thinking as you're rattling off the names.
Yeah, and in addition to the Slaughter, Nelson, and Night Ranger stuff, we had a couple of guest singers. We had Jim Peterick, so we had,
Survivor, right?
Yeah, Survivor and 38 Special.
That's it,
Hold On Loosely.
Yeah.
So we did the one show, and it was a huge success. The following year we did it again, and after the second time, somebody said, you guys should take this a little bit more seriously. And so fast forward a couple of years, and now we do it, at casinos, and we'll get together, and it's still pretty much the same nucleus. Gunnar, Mark, now Matt Nelson also plays bass, and then we'll have different guest singers. Last time we played, we had Ted Poley from Danger, another one of my favorite people. Eric Martin from Mr. Big, another one of my all-time favorite singers. Barry Goudreau from Boston, the guitar player from Boston, and Michael Sweet. And so we get to play. I get to play Boston songs, and and it's a blast. To play all these amazing songs from my past that I grew up listening to and loving, and and plus the repertoire changes with each show because depending on who the guests are. We've had Janie Lane and Jolyn Turner, and Janet from Vixen does it, and Lita Ford. We went to Alaska with it last year, and Lita Ford did it, and Jack Russell, and it's just a blast. And Derek, to make a short story long,
I'm loving this.
Derek also does them occasionally, and he lives here in Nashville, and so we reconnected because we toured together on Crazy Night. That's when I first met Derek. When
That's
Ted
right.
was opening.
Yeah.
So we hadn't seen each other in a lot of years, and then we rekindled our relationship on a scrap metal weekend. And I said to him, hey, if you ever need a keyboard player around town, I'm here. Right. And so now he calls me, and so we play. The place we play most regularly is a place called Bourbon Street, and it's a blues bar, and I love playing there because they have a Hammond organ that belongs to them with the big Leslies and everything, and I don't have to bring my own. So that's my personal favorite.
Sure.
But that's not where we're playing tomorrow, unfortunately. Tomorrow we're playing at the sister club to Bourbon Street, which is called Bowie's here in Nashville.
Okay.
And it's more of a rock club than a blues club, owned by the same people. And so hopefully we'll be able to get back to it. I mean, I was doing that probably 3 or 4 times a month with him before the pandemic started. And it's always a lot of fun. Get to play some of the Nugent stuff and just a bunch of old blues jams. It's always a lot of fun, and always great musicians. So Sandy Gennaro does that sometimes. Or he was doing it when I first started doing it. He was the drummer, and now Christopher Williams, who plays with Accept, does it most of the time.
Okay.
So it's I just love to play. I love playing great music with great musicians, and that certainly fills that need.
Oh, without it. And it's funny because I'm in New York my whole life, but last December I was in Nashville for the first time, and I came home and I said to all my friends, oh, we got to go on vacation there. Even if it's just to kind of go see all various live bands. I mean, it was a Sunday morning at 11 o'clock in the morning. My friend and I are walking down whatever the main street was. I don't remember the name of it. But there's live music at 11 o'clock in the morning on Sunday all over the place. I'm like, oh, this is cool.
And good live music.
And good, yes, good. Yeah, we sat there for an hour watching the bands, and I was like, this is good. This band is damn good.
Well, that's how I ended up living here. I was living when I left New York in '97. I moved to Miami Beach.
Okay.
And I was down in the South Beach area, and built a recording studio there, a full-blown SSL console, full studio. But the music scene there just sucked. You know, it was all DJs. Every club that opened, all they had were DJs, no live music.
Right.
And I really missed the rock thing. And then I did a tour with Lou Gramm in 2003. And after the Lou tour, I did a Molly Hatchet.
Okay.
I started playing with those guys. And at the point where I was about to be leaving that, our last show was here in Nashville. And I ran into an old friend who was working as a stagehand, and I said, you know, I'll pretty much be done by the end of this week with this tour. He goes, oh, man, he goes, you got to come check out Nashville. Come stay with me, because I'll show you around. And I was here the next week. I took him up on it, and we went out to Broadway, which is the street you're talking about.
Okay.
And, it was a Friday night. He took me to a couple of places, and we settled in one, and I ended up getting up and jamming with these guys, and I just fell in love with the town. Any place that had that much love for live music is where I wanted to be. And
Absolutely.
So, by coincidence, one of the guys I jammed with that first night also did real estate during the day.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, you know, on a break, I said to him, I love this place, but I got to move here. He goes, well, I'll show you some houses. And sure enough, we went out looking the next day, and the house I'm sitting in front of right now is the house I bought.
And that was the late 90s, you're saying? Oh, 2004. Okay.
2004.
Yeah.
I was in Miami Beach for 7 years before I moved here.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So.
And even 2004, Nashville, correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be, but Nashville wasn't the Nashville it is today. It was starting to come up a little bit, but now it's like, to me, Nashville today is what Los Angeles was in the 80s.
Yeah.
It's where all the rock stars are, to me.
Yes. Well, that's very true.
Right.
Vince Neil is here. There's so many people, and you don't even realize they're here until you bump into them somewhere. You go, what the hell are you doing here? I've been living here for 6 years. You know? What? You know? I just found out that the tour manager that was Lou's tour manager back in the 80s lives about 2 miles from me.
Oh, wow.
We haven't seen each other face to face yet, but we connected on Facebook, and I was like,
Nice.
You're in Hendersonville?
Right.
That's where I live. And
Okay.
he's like, yep. I was like, how long have you been there? He goes, about 4 years. So,
That's very cool.
everybody's coming. But it's gotten a little oversaturated right now. It's a little bit kind of like what happened to Times Square. You know, how all the coolness went away. It kind of became like a Disney North kind of vibe. You know?
Sure.
That's kind of what's going on down in the Broadway area too. Lots of construction, lots of high rises, and I don't know. They might have gone too far. But,
Okay.
but there's no shortage of bachelorette parties, that's for sure.
There you go. So, obviously we're in a pandemic now. What do you think's in store for you, though, for next year? Do you have any plans?
No, it sucks. At this point in my career, I wasn't really looking to take any more time off. You know, I had to take a 3-year hiatus because I had a series of shoulder surgeries a couple of years back.
Okay.
And so, I don't want to take any more time off.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I've had to. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm kind of having to rethink how I do what I do. The live thing isn't coming back as quickly as I would have hoped, although I understand why. Fortunately, we have the technology. I mean, I've been doing more recording work for people remotely for the last 10 years anyway. I have a studio here in my house. But, that doesn't replace playing music with musicians. I still need my fix of that. And I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. I'll keep you posted, though. I'll let you know if anything good happens. And I will definitely let you know when the book is done, because I'm going to need all the support I can get.
Well, I can promise you have it here. Is there anything else you want to tell the fans before we wrap this up?
No, I just look forward to doing this again when I have more to talk about, and I'm so grateful that you reached out to even want to have a conversation like this.
No, well, thank you, Gary. I appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you again. Stay safe and talk to you soon.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
Alrighty, there you have it. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation with Gary as much as I did. Gary, I'd like to thank you for spending over 75 minutes with me, chatting everything Kiss, Cinderella, and all the musical projects you've worked on over the years. I had a lot of fun hearing about it, and I know that the fans will enjoy hearing about it as well. I'd also like to take a moment and thank my friend Mike Namoli for helping connect Gary and I together in order to bring you this great conversation. Thanks a lot, Mike. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. If you're listening to one of my podcasts, subscribe over there as well. Also, head on over to Facebook and follow my page, The Rock and Roll Experience with Mike Brunn, where each and every day we talk about all the rock and roll music that you love. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. See you next time.